I hope people can see this slide. Yeah. So the title which I am going to deliver on is Nirvana, the Buddhist way. And the very spontaneous question is that why to read this? Why to read? Why to talk at all about this idea of Nirvana? And I know that there are different types of people having different types of expectations about reading this. And there are some people who belong to group A, they are my beloved students. They expect something like this. They expect that by reading this, why should we read Nibbana or idea of Nibbana so that we can fetch good marks in the examination? And for that, what we have to do is that we have to find out certain beautiful terminologies, very difficult words, very difficult slokas, Indian terminologies, so that they can write in the examination and they can find good marks. And they are also expecting great writing style, right? And most of the information, so that the answer will be very lucrative and something to remember. So they belong to group A. And another group, they want to read about, or they want to know about, the idea is that just like this, I am a teacher of philosophy, so I must know what is this and have to prove before others that I know about it. So some people are like that. They want to know about an idea not because they want to know it clearly or something other way around, but they simply want to know that much. They want to have information about that, and they want authentic slokas, hymns, good references. And I have come across some people, they always give like that, from where you have got this, right? And they speak very beautiful slokas to authenticate their idea about that. And they also are in expectation of valuable information. Now there are some people, they belong to group 3. They expect like this, they desire like this. They say, I love knowledge and must enjoy the logical coherence of the term to examine and evaluate the conceptual clarity. So certain people, they are like that. They want to know about certain idea or certain concept. Let me talk about Nibbana here. They want to know Nibbana only to find out the logical coherence of this term with other terms available in Buddhist tradition, so that they can find out the logical coherence and connections. They want comparative literature, high quality of conceptual analysis, and they find logical coherence, holistic approach. They try to find out that. And there are other group also. They ask this question: how does this idea of Nibbana, right, make a difference to the overall welfare of my or our life? Now forget about Nibbana even. When the time is we are passing through a pandemic, now our favorite hero Sushant Rajput commits suicide. And at that time, we normally ask a question, is that why should I read Nibbana? Forget about Nibbana. Can this idea Nibbana, which was spoken might be 100 years back, hundreds of years back, how does it help me? How does it help my life to become a better life? Does it really make my life a better life? That is what is the question. And this group 4 means the people who are in this group 4, they want to use the idea to live life. They want practical solutions to live life, to see things in that light, to be nostalgic and elevated. And they try to find out whatever might be one idea. Whenever they find one idea, they want to find out that idea, and they try to use that idea in their life. Now what Buddha said about Nibbana, they are concerned about only when they are convinced that this idea is going to help in their life. So does the idea of Nibbana help our life in any way? That is the question this group 4 asks. And my lecture today actually aims to this audience of group 4, but that doesn't matter. When I answer to this group 4, obviously my lecture will also engage other people like group 3, 2, and 1. So how to live a life, one, and how this idea that nirvana help in our life. That is the question I am going to start. But where to start? Now, the question is, whenever we open up a book on Indian philosophy, might be in our graduation classes or in post-graduation classes, or today in our adult age, when we are talking about nirvana, what we are doing is, first the question we ask, why should we worry about nirvana? Is it because simply Buddha himself tried for it? That is the reason why we should also try for it. Why should we try for getting it? That is the first question we have to ask. And this is the question of ethics. Now this is the ethical dimension of the idea nirvana. That why should people desire nirvana in their life? All right, I understand that almost all the traditions of Indian philosophy, they stress on either nirvana or they say moksha as the ultimate aim of our life. And they propagate us, they persuade us to desire nirvana or moksha in our life. That is the ultimate aim of our life. They say like that. But we have to ask question. Why should we really want it? Or from there, we come together. Do we really want it? That is the question. And then the next question comes, how to get this? How to get nirvana or upaya, or what is the method to get it? And here we have a very clear idea, because Buddha himself has given us idea how to attain it. That I will not speak much. I will speak a little bit because that is found in the book. In fact, the aim of my lecture today is not to elaborate the idea, because Buddha has very sufficiently clearly elaborated the idea, and you have also books. They can give you very good information about idea. But my intention is only to ask different questions, possible questions, and connect the dots, connect the possibilities. How can we speak or debate within the Buddhist tradition to talk about nirvana? That was my concern. So about methodology, I will speak less. But another very important thing is, before we want this, we have to know what is this, right? What is nirvana? Now, surprisingly, when this question was asked to Buddha himself, that what is nirvana, surprisingly and ironically, Buddha was silent. He preferred to be silent. And we must also discuss on that, why Buddha always remained silent when he was asked this question, that what is this nirvana? Now, Buddha was silent about discussing metaphysics or ontology of this idea nirvana. But then he was persuading it. And he was telling others. He was persuading others to have it. But when people ask that what is this, he was silent. This is a very interesting thing I had to ask to myself, right? And then the next question is, how to know this? Whether really Buddha got enlightened or not, how to know it? This is an epistemological question. So we have metaphysical question related to the idea of nirvana. We have epistemological question related to the idea of nirvana. And we have ethical questions related to the idea of nirvana. So we have to speak on these three, right? But we have to speak on the first one. The most important thing is that why should we really want nirvana in our life? But before that, let's examine what exactly we want, what you and I want. Do we want like this? If we want it, we want nirvana, suppose, Let's ask ourselves, do we really want nirvana, or is it because only it is written in the book, therefore it is injected to our life that nirvana is something which we have to want? Is it natural, is it factual, or is it psychological that we really desire nirvana? Okay, this is a fact that Buddha did it. Buddha left his kingdom. Buddha left his luxury, right? Buddha left everything, his beautiful wife, his beautiful kid, everything he left and pursued for this. Okay, Buddha did it, but do we really desire nirvana in our life at all? So that is the question. Okay, now Buddha said us, or gives a clue, that really we want this kind of experience. What is that? That is the first noble truth. That Buddha shows to us that life is full of suffering. That is true. We also experience in our daily life. We know when we are sick, we think that life has lots of suffering when we are sick. When we lose someone, when we lose our relatives, when we lose our loved ones, then we realize that life is really full of suffering, right? And when we see some old people who are in pain, in tremendous physical pain, we believe that yes, life has suffering. And we also experience certain kind of sufferings in our life. When we lose money in our business, when we lose our health because of some dreaded disease, then we also sometimes feel that yes, life is suffering. But really, if we ask ourselves, should we not also think, when now people laugh, when a small baby smiles, when the tree blossoms, right? When the nature actually manifests itself, we also experience pleasure. But Buddha, when Buddha said that the life is full of suffering, he was not talking about this life in which we are living, this mundane life in which we are living. He was going a little bit beyond of this life. He was talking about something ultimate. And that actually we don't normally experience. But we experience in our normal life some amount of pleasure, some amount of pain. From some amount of pain, we cannot generalize that life is full of pain. Life has also pleasure. But when Buddha says that life is full of, in his noble truth, first noble truth, when Buddha says that life is full of suffering, he doesn't mean this mundane life, this day to day life. And he also was referring to a logical possibility that if our life has sporadic pain and suffering here and there, then it can be extended that life is full of suffering. So that is the meaning of the first noble truth, that is Sarvam Dukkham. But then, is this what we want? What do you want in our life? Normally, you just ask yourself, when you are lonely, when you are alone at your bedroom or study room, what do you want in your life? You want some money? Okay, that is very immediate thing. But what do you want really? You want some absence of disease. We don't normally want any kind of disease. We don't desire any kind of disease. So every one of us, naturally, we desire that we should be of absence of disease. We also desire an absence of anxiety and anguish. We want mental freedom, mental pleasure, mental happiness. We want that. And of course, we want absence of death. No one wants death. Of course, Buddha also didn't want death. We don't want death, right? So this is what naturally we desire. Then, is this we want? Then what do we want? We want some physical wellness, that our body is all right. We want that our mind is also very good, sound mental health. And we want some sensual pleasure. I am talking in this life. I am talking our daily life. We want these things in our life. And we always desire that I should live for 80 years, 90 years, 100 years, or whatever, right? And some of us also unconsciously or sometimes in our dream think that what will happen if I live forever like Hanumanji, right? Immortality. So some of us also want immortality. Like what exactly I want to say that when our psychology is extended to a little bit, then we will land in a particular way, some from possibility to impossibility. That we are living for 80 years, 90 years, that is very natural. 100 years or 110 years, that is very natural. But we desire that we should live forever. That is called immortality. Some of us, very unconsciously, though openly we say that no, 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 I don't want, but unconsciously we desire that we should live forever. And sometimes also we want, in that fashion, we want bliss. But what is that bliss? That is very important. Now let's talk about Nibbana. At this juncture, Buddhism gives us an idea about that possibility. That yes, we can avoid all these things. We can avoid all these things. We can desire for immortality. We can desire for bliss. We can desire for something, right? How is it possible? Now here actually the idea Nibbana comes. Now the idea of Nibbana, that word comes from these things. Etymologically, if we disseminate that, we will find there are three things. Nir is a prefix, va to blow, vra to cover. So in that way, Nibbana means to blow or to cover. Sometimes it is also referred as blowing out or cooling. Now, blowing out means complete extinction. We say the lamp is blown out. That means the lamp is completely extinguished. That means when the fuel is covered, the fuel is consumed up, then the lamp is completely extinguished. So that is the meaning of blowing out. Now, Nibbana in this sense takes a negative meaning, that when we extinguish all our being, when we extinguish all our desires, when we extinguish all our existence, then we will achieve Nibbana. So in this sense, Nibbana becomes a negative thing, right? But there is another also, that is called cooling. And cooling means not annihilation, dying out of hot passion only. So cooling out means that we should simply control our hot passions. We should control our bad passions. That is what is the meaning of cooling. Now the idea is, in which sense Buddha used this word, Nibbana. So that is the question which actually attracted me. Now most of the Western scholars, they believe, of course, by reading Buddhist text and all, they interpret that Buddha was more inclined towards a negative meaning of Nibbana. That means unless and until your being is completely extinguished, you cannot find Nibbana. But Indian thinkers like Radhakrishnan, they actually interpret in a positive meaning of Buddhist idea of Nibbana. And accordingly, we find two different kinds of Nibbana. One is called Upadhisesa, that means passions are only extinct. Your complete being is not extinct. You are not annihilated completely, but only your passions are extinct. And in this way, you can understand that Buddha actually meant Nibbana in this sense, because in 35 years old, Buddha got enlightenment or Nibbana. But after that, he served for another 45 years. He served in the society. So all this life of Buddha could be understood in the light of this Upadhisesa concept of Nibbana. That means you still exist, you live, you present over your body, but you simply extinguish your passions.
Dr. Das, some
Yes.
participants are waiting. Some participants are waiting.
Okay, thank you. Let me do that. 1 minute. Let me do that, and I'll come. Yeah. So can you see, please? Okay. Oh, so many people are waiting. In fact, so could you see my slide, or Kola sir, my slide is seen to you or not? Anyone please respond. If the slides are
No,
No,
sir.
sir.
Yes,
No,
sir.
the slides are not visible.
or slides are not visible. Okay,
No, sir.
let me tell you. Is it visible now?
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes,
Yes,
sir. It
Sir,
is.
yes, sir.
Okay. So we are talking about two kinds of nirvana, and I have written two kinds of possibility, right? And we are talking about upadhisesa type of nirvana and anupadhisesa type of nirvana. Now, upadhisesa type of nirvana means that you still live in this world, your bodily presence is there, but simply we extinguish all our passions, all our desires, and that is what is called upadhisesa kind of nirvana, right? And we sometimes also in some texts we find two words called nirvana and parinirvana, right? And nirvana in that word, that in that sense means uh, means you are saying some people are still waiting. Okay, now can you see this?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So two types of nirvana, I think I am very clear about that. In upadhisesa kind of nirvana, the the person physically exists in this world, he lives in this world, but he has complete control over his desires and passions, right? And in anupadhisesa kind of nirvana, the whole bodily presence is not there, right? And you can also connect with other kinds of moksha. We can talk about mukti. I don't want to talk about that. And in there are two other kinds of terminologies we find in texts, also Buddhist texts. It's called nirvana and parinirvana. Now the same thing, nirvana means you are still alive, you are working, you are living in this world, but you are not affected by the worldly things. That is what is called nirvana. When you achieve that kind of mental state, means where you are living in the world, you are working in the society, you are living in the society, but you are not affected by the worldly affairs. That kind of state, when we reach that kind of state, that is called nirvana, right? The question is it possible? That is another question we are going to deal with, right? Because normally this doesn't happen. Normally, when what happens when we suffer from a disease, we feel pain, right? When other people very close to us, they suffer from some disease, we also feel pain, we are disturbed, right? Now what Buddha actually asks to us is that you are living in the society, but you are not living in the society. So that state is called upadhisesa kind of state. Okay. And parinirvana is beyond the world of transitory, means you go beyond, means your life is not there now, your body doesn't exist in this world, means this kind of nirvana can only be attained after death. So nirvana can be attained in this life, parinirvana can be attained after death. So this is the distinction. And the distinction is also upadhisesa and anupadhisesa, same distinction. Now my question is, Buddha could be talk about Nibbana. Can Buddha talk about Parinirvana? So that is the question. And I said that whenever Buddha was asked the question whether what is Nibbana, Buddha used to be silent. In fact, Buddha used to be silent in this kind of Nibbana, Parinirvana. That after death, what will happen? What type of existence that will have? Perhaps Buddha was silent about that. But Buddha could not be silent in case of Nibbana, right? Because Buddha persuades us to attain Nibbana in this world, in this life only. Now, the choice is between life or death. And Buddha talks of life. For Buddha, life is desirable. I can understand. Let me tell you that that incident in which Buddha was doing. Someone is coming again. Okay. Can you see this slide? The choice between life or death?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. So we are stuck with these two possibilities. One is life or death. In fact, when we are disturbed, let's talk about this Sushant Rajput also. When he took his life, now this is a again this is a problem to say that whether he committed suicide or not. Suppose he committed suicide. Suppose anyone who commits suicide, why a person commits suicide? Somewhere he thinks that my life will be better after death. I am talking about that kind of thinking, right? Some people think that I can live better after death. Now we have a choice that life is good or death is good, and this is a very interesting discussion which comes in Buddhist talk also. Now, Buddha never talked about afterlife, or Buddha never talked about death. He used to be silent about death. And if someone asks you that if there is a possibility that you are going to get Nibbana after your death, will you commit suicide? I think Buddha will never do that. Now, why? Let me tell you that interesting episode from Buddha. You know that when Buddha went from his house, from his kingdom, searching for knowledge, searching for the ways out to avoid the suffering, what he did? He was searching knowledge. He was searching enlightenment in the jungle, here and there, wandering in the jungle without any aim, only in search of enlightenment. And we know that we know that Buddha became weak, became unconscious. And on that day, this Maya Devi came and gave some milk to her, Buddha, and Buddha became conscious. And after that, Buddha returned. And in fact, that is what is the time when Buddha got enlightened after that. Now, this is a symbol. This episode is a symbol. The symbol is Buddha could realize that the bliss or the enlightenment which he was searching, this cannot be attained after death. Why should we talk about that? We should not talk about that. We simply should talk about this life, and we should simply say that how our life can be beautiful. This life can be beautiful. This is a very interesting, thing which I found in Buddhism. Buddha talks about this life. Now he is silent about death. Death happens to us, so we should not talk about that. We should talk about life. Now, more concerned about the negative aspect. This is again a very interesting thing, right? Now, just before I said that Western people, Western scholars say or consider that Buddha was talking a negative interpretation of Nibbana. Negative in the sense that he was saying when we reject, when we avoid, when we rebuke all kinds of passions, desires from our life, then our life becomes a good life and we get Nibbana. So this is a kind of negative aspect of Nibbana, right? And after that, what type of life it would be, Buddha was silent. Many people they consider, but we also find, this is very interesting, I found in Avisita Sutra, that Buddha says that when we get parinirvana, we belong to Brahma, we become associated with Brahma. Now many people will be surprised, some of our students might be surprised that how Buddha can talk about Brahma, right? Buddha can talk about God. But this is true. This is very interesting. Interesting in case of Buddhism. Now the man who was struggling against, right, Vedas, how can he refer to a Vedic God, that is Brahma? So this is very interesting. Now, sometimes Buddha talked in negative terms about Nirvana. Sometimes he also talks about some positive thing about Nirvana. And my question was, why is it so? Right? Why is it so? Why Buddha simply did not say that, look, it is very clear, everyone knows that Buddha was more concerned about suffering. And he was trying to find out how suffering can be minimized from our life. That is it. The main focus of Buddha was that. Now, he says that if all of our desires, because all the desires are cause of our suffering. Now, if all our desires are extinguished, all our desires are just avoided from our life, then we can get nirvana. That's all. Then why again Buddha talks about a positive nature of nirvana? That is again a very interesting question. But let me admit some people. Okay. Thank you. I hope you can understand this much. And there, this is what. Can you see this slide?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So this is called a riddle, and I find it in Buddhist concept of nirvana. That is negation of disease health. Now, what Buddha said? Buddha said, if all the desires from our life will be just extinguished, then we get nirvana. And that is it, we should be satisfied about after that. Then the question is, don't talk about nirvana. Let's talk about in our life. That is, if our body doesn't have any disease, then should we say our body is a healthy body? This is a question which we find. And this is also another which is very clear to us, is negation of negation affirmation. Most of the logic classes, our teachers of course teach us that negation of negation is affirmation, right? But is it really true? And therefore I have written, you have to think over that. Is negation of disease is health? That is the question. We have to think over that. If my body is absence of all kinds of disease, then am I healthy? Should I be called as healthy? Right? And this is what Buddha was talking about. And logic is really a hard taskmaster. That if negation of negation is affirmation, it might not be. That is what the beauty of the Buddha. Now, the dwindling Buddha, I was saying. Okay. Buddha also says that when we forget our individuality, when we forget our individual self-consciousness, and we mingle into the common consciousness, the greater consciousness, that is what is called nirvana. So this is the positive side. Look, negative side is this, that you have to be concentrated on your self-consciousness. You have to work on your body, your mind, so that your desires will be extinguished completely. Then you will get nirvana. But now Buddha talks in a positive way. That is not sufficient. Even though your all desires are completely extinguished, you are not getting nirvana. That is not sufficient. What you have to do is that you have to think in a general consciousness, universal consciousness, he says. And therefore, perhaps, sorry, many people consider, or in fact allege, that Buddhist philosophy talks about passivity in life. You just imagine if nirvana means that we are devoid of all kinds of passions. Nirvana means we are rejecting all kinds of passion in our life, desires in our life. Then what type of life we have to live? We have to live a very passive life. We should not do anything because desire actually triggers us acting, right? That is a kind of negative aspect of Nibbana. But Buddha doesn't satisfy that. Buddha doesn't stop there. Buddha goes ahead, says that activity is a positive side of Nibbana. A Nibbana, a person or Arhat is a person who gets actually Nibbana, Arhat. Arhat is not a life of passivity. He is a life of activity. And you can also understand after getting Nibbana in the age of 35 years, Buddha worked on teaching, preaching social revolution, making social revolution another 45 years. So the state of Nibbana is not the state of passivity, it is the state of activity. Now, it is not the state of annihilation only, it is the state of perfection. So, what I am trying to say is that Buddha is not simply talking about negative side of Nibbana, that you simply cast away all your bad passions, cast away all your asravas, we say, cast away all your bad passions, then you will get Nibbana, you will become perfect. No, you have to go more. And that is what is called from universal detachment to universal love. Right? So this is what Buddha talks about, the positive side of Nibbana. And that is why I said that Buddha was dwindling from negative side of Nibbana to positive side of Nibbana.
Dr. Das,
Yes.
please allow others to join.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So am I understood? Am I clear up to this? Okay. Thank you. Now, and we know that there are two sections of Buddhism. One is called Hinayana and another is called Mahayana. That is exactly based on these two ideas. One is negative aspect of Nibbana, that you become Arhat and finish. That is the end of the story. That you become Arhat by you get Nibbana by forecasting all your passions, by rejecting all your passions, and discarding all your passions, you become Arhat. You get Nibbana. That's the end of the story. And that is what is on the basis of that it is called Hinayana. And then we have another kind of Buddhist sect is called Mahayana, on the basis that no, even though you get Arhatship, you get Nibbana, that is not enough. You have to work for a positive change in the society. You have to work for the Arhatship of others. Now, unless and until you become closer to others, how can you think about others? So you are saying that you have to lose all your desires. You have to discard all your desires so that you will get Nibbana. But at the same time, you are saying that you have to think for others. You have to take others into that Arhatship. So that is what is Mahayana. So in that sense, I say that Buddha was talking in two dialogues, in two tongues. Sometimes he was talking about negative aspect of Nibbana. Sometimes he was talking about positive aspect of Nibbana. But then the next one, how to get it. And it is very clear, we should not talk more on that because the time is short. Upaya or methods to get Nibbana, and most of us we know that it is written in Fourth Noble Truth, Ashtanga Marga, and I simply read down them: right faith, right reserve, right speech, right action, right living, right effort, right thought, right concentration. Now, if we do these things, then we get Nibbana in this life, not in afterlife, this life. So Buddha was not more interested on afterlife or Parinibbana. Buddha was more concerned about this life, this Arhatship. Okay? And Buddha says these are the methodology. There are not more debate on this, so we should not talk about that. But the question is, when Buddha says that we have to do right faith or samyak drishti, right reserve, how do you know that? What is right right faith. Okay, and how right is right. I remember another philosopher, very important philosopher, who talks about that right path. Now let me read out that. Anybody can get angry. That is an easy matter. Anybody can give or spend money, but to give it to the right person, to give the right amount of it, and to give it at the right time, and for the right cause, and in the right way, this is not what anybody can do, nor is it easy. This is Aristotle. Buddha also talks in that way. So when we talk about right speech, right conduct, right speech, right action, all these things should be discussed in the middle path. So Buddha was talking about that. And you can understand his dwindling up from negative aspect of Nirvana to positive aspect of Nirvana, because Buddha always wanted to avoid extremes. That is perhaps I said this. Not to say yes or not to say no, let life go as you go.
Sir.
This is what I say, and thank you very much.
Okay, thanks so much, Dr. Das, for exploring the concept of Nirvana before our viewers. Today, you have beautifully explained and clarified all the concepts coming under Buddhist Nirvana. You have tried to put different questions and queries on Buddha's silence. Hello.
Yes, I can. Yeah. Should I read up from directly from the chat box? What is the question? Anyone please ask.
Yes, sir. Please continue. Patatavan, sir, please continue.
Yes. Okay. Now, someone asked Monisha Sahu might be. She asked, if a man gets nirvana after death. I said, Buddha was silent. I am too. I also prefer to be silent in this. That whether after death we are getting nirvana doesn't matter to us. How does it matter that after death what will happen to us? Let's talk more concentrated on this life. How can we become happy? In fact, Buddha was talking about nirvana only in this life. And therefore I said that he was silent when it was asked, what about parinirvana? What about after death? Right? He was preferring to be silent, because Buddha was more concerned that how our life in this world be beautiful. And sometimes some people would say that Buddha was talking about hedonism for that, but that is not, we should not enter to that. Okay. Now another, Ratnakar Gajendra sir asks this, Buddha is talking of past life, present life and future life. How do you explain in the concept of nirvana? Buddha has said ignorance is the cause of suffering. How do you explain in your explanation of Buddhism? Yeah, very good. So look, ignorance is the cause of everything that almost all of the Indian philosophers in Indian philosophy admits. Buddha also. Even that is also quite practical in our life. That means when I don't have some information, I face lots of problems in my practical life. And therefore, perhaps our government has given us right to information. And most of the time, people say, Bacon was saying that knowledge is power. Now people are saying information is power. If you have lots of information, then you can you face little problem in your life. And when you face little problem in your life, then your life is happy. Buddha was also talking in that way, ignorance. But he was talking in a philosophical manner, how ultimately will be. If ignorance disturbs us attaining our job, if ignorance hinders us attaining or even going to Bhubaneswar, if we don't know what is the route, then I will face problems. I will face lots of suffering. So ignorance is the cause of all these things. Now Buddha says how to avoid that ignorance. And of course, beautifully done, beautiful question asked by Gajendra sir, is that Buddha was a truly scientist. What he was saying is that look, you should not talk about knowledge in extreme lines. You simply wait and watch. You simply think what is happening around you. And if you get knowledge, then you'll be happy. I think this much. Yeah. Yeah, life is full of sorrow. Yeah, that Buddha also said that Buddha is full of sorrow, but I actually don't agree on that. I don't agree on that because if you think in that line that life is full of suffering, it is something you talk in a very extreme sense. No, I said that when a baby smiles, when a tree blossoms, we become happy. No one can deny it. Sometimes no one can deny. Okay, that lasts for a very little time, but for 1 minute at least, we become happy. Pleasure, we feel pleasure, and we have to celebrate that. Why should I say that life is full of suffering? Now, when Buddha was saying that life is full of suffering, in another terminology, in another context, is that ultimately our life has the possibility to become painful. So that is what the Buddha was thinking about, and Buddha was trying to avoid that. So that is the meaning of life is suffering. So life is not really full of suffering. It has also lots of pleasure, lots of happiness. Okay. Yeah, if Buddha remains silent about death, then why he talks about rebirth? Yeah, this is a very interesting question. And I also asked many philosophers, many professors. I also read many books. Buddha never talked about rebirth, right? Buddha never talked about rebirth. Buddha simply talked that look, there is a stream of consciousness. It continues, stream of consciousness, and each stream of consciousness gives rise to another stream of consciousness. And in that way, Buddha simply talks a logical possibility, imagines a logical possibility that the consciousness will continue, the stream will continue, then there will be rebirth. But the same person will becoming, getting rebirth. Buddha will never say that. Buddha will not accept that. The same person is getting rebirth. Buddha will never accept that. Okay. Is Buddhist theory of death and rebirth is similar to materialism? This is very interesting question. Yeah, look, Buddha was entering in the Indian philosophical scenario or cultural scenario when Vedanta was very much popular in Indian civilization. Vedantic philosophy was very popular, and Buddhism. You almost all of us know that Buddhism was began in reaction to Vedantic philosophy. So in one hand, Buddha had to respond to Vedanta, and in the other hand, Buddha had to respond Vedanta's response, that is materialism, Charvaks. And Buddha had to elude both of them. Buddha has to avoid both of them. That Buddha should not talk in terms of Charvak, materialism. Either he also doesn't want to talk in the terms of Vedanta. So he wanted to avoid both the extremes. And therefore he finds the middle path. And if you talk about his ideas on death, his ideas on life, it is the middle path. It is not either materialism nor Vedantic reincarnation, rebirth, that permanent soul theory. This he avoids. At the same time, he also avoids Charvak's theories of everything into dust. That also he avoids. So he very beautifully, very intelligently now crafts his line in a middle path, avoiding both materialism and that Vedantic idealism. Okay. There are many. Okay. Uh, should I? So I have the time, right, sir?
Sir, but so many questions are there.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So, is this concept of Nirvana and Parinirvana similar to Jivan Mukti and Videha Mukti of Vedanta? Yeah, that actually I avoided to. I said that Buddha, no philosopher or no philosophy start with your scratch. So he has to be influenced by the no antithesis or no Uttara Paksha, Purva Paksha, Uttara Paksha of that system, right? So Vedanta was now that Jivan Mukti and Vidya Mukti, that idea was already there in Vedantic tradition, right? And Buddha could not avoid that. Buddha had to respond to it. And therefore, Buddha talked about Jivan Mukti. Buddha talked about a beautiful life, right? But Buddha became silent about Videha Mukti. Jivan Mukti, he was very clear that you can attain your liberation here, and that is the most important thing you have to do in your life. And he becomes silent only when he was asked whether what is the nature of parinirvana, what is the nature of vivat, what is the nature of atma after death. He becomes silent there. He doesn't talk about that. Okay, so he doesn't talk about Vidya Mukti, but that terminology was already there. So Buddha was also aware of that. Yeah. So second session will start with 6.5 direct. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, okay, sir. Actually, today you have put the logical clarification of the concept nirvana, and it was very beautiful. The logicality that you have put in your lecture in connection to understand nirvana is really excellent, brilliant, and really it is appreciated from every core of heart. We are really grateful for your brilliant speech today that we have not faced before. Thank you very much, sir. Now we have to move to second session.
Sorry for interruption.
Sir.
Hello.
Hello. Sir. Sir.
Sorry for interruption.
Any queries? Any queries? Or any?
Could you please conclude your lecture by answering one last question?
Okay. Over to Dr. Das. Please, another question.
What is that? What is that, please?
Sir,
I can see in the chat box. Can you please say your question, please?
Sir, can I ask you directly?
Yes. You ask directly because I cannot see it in the chat box.
Okay. On the one hand, Buddha proclaims that life is full of suffering, and at the same time, he proposes a way to get rid of the suffering. My question is it really possible, practically possible, to eliminate all sorts of suffering being alive? Because to my mind, I suppose that if you are alive, you are subject to some sorts of suffering.
Yes. So that is the question. Is it possible?
Yes, sir.
Is it practically possible? That is the question.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, Buddha at the same time, Buddha says that life is full of suffering. At the same time, he also talks the way how to minimize, though not the absence of complete absence of suffering, but how to minimize this. Yes, there are lots of logical connections behind this idea, and therefore perhaps the idea of rebirth, idea of Mahaparinirvana, idea of Videha Mukti comes. That if suffering could not be minimized in this life, then it has to be minimized in the afterlife. So that is a sense of solace. That don't worry, if you are not happy in this life, then you will become happy in the afterlife. So that is yes. But Buddha was not talking about that. Buddha was talking that yes, suffering is there. That is a fact. So we should not think in that literal sense that life is full of suffering means every time, every moment, our life is full of suffering. That is not literal meaning of that. Literal meaning is that our life has the possibility of suffering. Now the suffering can be physical suffering, This suffering can be mental suffering. There are many different kinds of sufferings. There is a possibility that we can meet some kind of suffering in our life. Now, Buddha's concern is that how to minimize it. Now, for that perhaps reason that for physical suffering, we have medicine. Now, Buddhist, the whole system of medicine is there, right? That how physical suffering can be minimized. For mental suffering, Buddha talks about these Ashtanga Marga, right? Buddha believes that mental suffering occurs due to ignorance. Ignorance means ignorance of our mental dilemmas, right? And that if we can, apply those Ashtanga Margas, then our suffering can be minimized. And that doesn't mean that you will go to extreme. That okay, that means all sufferings will come to zero. It is not possible. It is not possible. This is not possible. And that doesn't mean that I'm saying that if it is not possible in this life, then in the next life it will be possible. That also cannot be said. Buddha therefore said that that cannot be said. So that is what I'm trying to say, that you should not take Buddhist idea that suffering, our life is suffering in a very literal sense. It should be taken in other sense that suffering is a possibility, and we have a full proof, at least strategic maneuver to minimize that possibility. That is all what Buddha said for us. This much at least.
Sir, Amrita Haldar.
Yes, sir.
Hello, sir. Amrita Haldar has another question.
Yes.
Amrita Haldar has a question on chat box.
Acha, life is possibility of suffering, but not always suffering. Yeah, this is not a question, that exactly what I said. This is an affirmation of what I said. So it is Buddha's first noble truth that life is full of suffering. This should not mean that each and every moment of life we experience suffering. That should not be interpreted like that way. What Buddha said simply that there is a possibility of suffering in our life, that is a fact in our life, and if we want, we desire, then we can minimize that suffering. This much I think my reading of Buddha suffices me to say like that.
Sir, excellent conclusion, brilliant speech, and really we are speechless. Nothing to appreciate in any other words. Really, that is, we have no words to appreciate you. This is the first lecture on Nirvana that we have listened to you, that we have never listened before. Thank you very much, sir. And we have to move to second session, sir.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Then we have to move to second session.
Yes, sir.
Second session. Our speaker is Dr. Anup Rao.